I am attempting to build a camp house shed in my backyard. In this episode, I get the entire shed framed and get all the roof trusses installed. It was a ton of work, and I made plenty of mistakes along the way. Stick around and watch as I continue my march towards shed greatness. All right, with the slab totally cured, we can now move on to framing. And just a couple things real quick. This is not gonna be a how-to video on how to frame something. I'm an idiot. This is how I'm gonna frame it. Hopefully it's correct. And the second thing is that I was originally gonna do this all by hand, meaning I was gonna hand nail everything. I'm a sucker and bought a framing nailer. Having framed something with the nailer before, I know just how much more fast it goes, so that's what we're gonna use. And after getting my lumber package conveniently delivered, I can start bringing it back here so I can start on this back wall. So when it came to laying out this wall, I came with a plan. I had the 3 transom window placements mapped out, and I should have just been able to mark it and go. But at the last minute, I started second guessing myself and remembered I didn't account for the jack studs on each window. So I stood here for far longer than I'm willing to admit to adjust my numbers. And you'll see later that I still managed to screw something up. Key takeaway is don't feel bad if this takes a little longer than you thought. It's better to take the time and do it right, or do like I did and take the time and still screw it up. All right, so here's a cool trick if you come across a twisted 2x4, which let's be honest, of course you're going to. Drive a screw or nail into the side that's twisting away, and then use your hammer for some easy leverage and get it back into position. Now that's the kind of crusty grandpa wisdom you could show your kids or grandkids. Now when it came to framing out the windows on this back wall, I made some headers from 2x4s and 1/2-inch plywood, because that's what I think you're supposed to do, right? Now these windows are 29 inches wide, so I thought the span needed that, but what do I know? Then here you can see me framing out the inside of the window area with the jack studs that I originally forgot in my sketch. And my wife must have heard the nailer from the house because she came running wanting to try it. There really is something about a framing nailer that gets your blood pumping. It's a visceral caveman feeling. I don't know what it is or why it happens, but it just does. If you used one, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, I set up a little makeshift workbench with a miter saw because I got really tired of bending over and using a circular saw. And of course, like any workbench, it quickly just got cluttered with tools. All right, I'll stop talking. Let's get the rest of this wall framed. Remember that screw up I alluded to earlier? Yeah. I realized I not only made each of the end window openings too big, frankly better than too small, but the spacing of the windows was also off. It turns out I nailed one stud on the opposite side of my measurement line and shifted things by 1.5 inches. Now luckily, I was able to remedy this by simply adding a 2x4 spacer into each window. That both fixed the window size and corrected the window placement. You'll never know from the outside, but I'll know. Oh, I'll know. With the wall framing done, now I can get ready to stand it up. And to do that, I'm going to add a pivoting leg thingy to each top corner so that the wall can rest on them rather than on my face. And to be honest, you really only need to do this if you're building alone, like I'm doing. After adding some pathetic little stakes to stop the wall from going off the back edge, I went ahead and drilled some 1/2-inch holes through the bottom plate that I'll use later to pass through the concrete anchors. As I mentally prepared to clean and jerk this wall, I wondered how much this thing weighs. Turns out a lot. You know what it is? It's those little 2x4 spacers I added. Yep, pushed it over the edge. Now this end wall in particular is as simple as it gets. There's no windows or doors. Hard for even me to screw that up. Oh, and pro tip here, a little leaf blower to clear off the slab before you assemble the walls or stand them up is pretty clutch. I'm just throwing in a couple screws into each corner to keep things together for now. I'll of course go back and readjust to get everything square. Now the opposite end wall is going to have a big old roll-up door, 6 feet wide by 7 feet tall. So I'm making my header from a lamination of 2x6s. Again, because I don't know, seems like a good idea. I'm also going with double jack studs because, well, first, that just sounds cool. It seems like the right thing to do. Now I could have used a 12-foot bottom plate to keep everything square, but instead I'm adding this temporary brace while I stand up the wall and get it positioned. Otherwise it's going to turn into a floppy tortilla. See, the thing about plans is they're really good if you follow them. In a rush to get this thing framed up, I built the end wall. As I was saying, I built the end wall before standing up this long wall. And the way this is framed up, the long walls are actually the total width of the slab, meaning they don't fit in between both short walls when they're laying down. So I can't actually frame it now. Yeah. I should have just done what I was planning on doing and building both long walls first and then the end walls. So now I just have to basically lay the end wall down, build the long wall, and then stand the end wall back up. Minor hiccup, but it highlights an important lesson that the order of operations when you do something like this is very important. And I'll spare you having to watch me frame yet another wall, but I wanted to point out that this wall features a man door to get in and out of the shed, this small window in the middle of the wall, and a larger window opening that I've got special plans for that may or may not involve watching college football by the fire. We'll get to that later. Okay, so I'm at this point where I have to do this kind of weird dance. You see I've got the short wall here on the ground, I've got the long wall all framed out, ready to be stood up, but I've got to stand it up, not tip it over, somehow scoot it over around the front of that wall, tack it in place, and then move this wall over to the side and put it in there. No idea how this is going to go. I'm going to kind of just have to think ahead, but we'll give it a shot. And by the way, this would be so much easier with somebody else. I'm choosing to do it by myself. I'm a glutton for punishment. What can I say? And just as I was getting ready to manhandle this last wall into place, I hear my wife approaching. And I thought, oh, sweet, some help. Okay, to be honest, that went smoother than I thought. We've got all the walls up, they're just loosely kind of tacked together, nothing secured. Now I need to take the time to square everything up. A step that we should have taken a teensy bit more time with on the slab. You can see the predictable little wedge shape of foundation on each side of the shed. Again, I think that's going to go away once we put all the siding and everything up. But this back edge of the pad is a true reference, so my back wall is going to be flush with that, and I'm going to cheat it probably to that back corner and then square up the shed. So I'll pull diagonals, I'll get it all tacked together, we'll put all the top plates on, and then once everything looks nice and square, we'll pre-drill and insert our expanding concrete anchors. At that point, everything should be locked in place and we can move on to the upper structure. Ah, the sound of a hammer drill and a masonry bit in the morning. Now I'm told one of the most important parts of drilling holes like this for concrete anchors is to make sure you get the dust out of the hole. Now I'm just using some compressed air, but I think a vacuum would actually work better. These are expanding anchor studs, and I found that helps to thread the nut on before hammering them in. Just don't go full Donkey Kong on them. Also worth mentioning that I first made sure all my walls were straight and not bowed in or out. Now, if you do go full Donkey Kong on these things, which I may or may not have done, you can damage the threads, or worse, bend the stud. Now, I had a couple with some damaged threads, but a quick pass of a die over the bolt should clean them right up. If it gets bent too bad, I guess you just cut it off and drill another hole. I really don't know. Next up, I've got to get the top plates on, which is going to tie everything together even more, and frame out that little pony wall. I don't know if that's even really what you call it, but that little wall up here with the 2 transom windows, I'm gonna get that framed up and put in place. And then hopefully later today we can get to roof trusses, which sounds really intimidating. I framed the transom dormer wall thing on the top plate itself, which actually made install way easier since I'm working alone. And with some strategically placed uprights acting as stops, I can get it nailed down. Now I wish I could say that we were done with framing, but we've still got the roof trusses. What's been probably most humbling so far is that even though I've taken a lot of math to get my degree in engineering, simple things like laying out windows and doors on walls seems to trip me up. So when we move on to the roof rafters, now we're talking about angles and trigonometry. But one of the benefits of first modeling this in Fusion 360 is that I got to figure out all those angles in the computer rather than in real life. I threw together this simple truss to act as a template I can use to make the rest. It turns out the trusses I made up in my 3D model were pretty dang close to a 10-12 roof pitch. So I used those dimensions and got it in place. Then I can transfer the locations of the bird's mouth on one end and the flush cut on the other. And when I was happy with the fit, I attempted to make a jig so I could replicate the truss. Now if this shed had a wood floor, I could make a full-size jig right on the floor. But since I overpaid for a crappy concrete foundation, I had to get a little creative. Then I just made a master of each part and cut out some copies. So while I was cutting up this plywood, you'll see me kind of pause here, take a second. At that time I felt a piece of wood go in my eye. So I kind of stopped, did the whole blinky thing, try to make it work its way out. We've all had sawdust or wood chips in our eyes and most of the time it comes out. But this one felt a little bit different. It felt like it was staying in there. So long story short, I went to a doctor. Sure enough, there was a piece of wood stuck up underneath my eyelid, so no amount of flushing would have got it out. I had put it off so long and rubbed my eyes so much that I actually had abrasions on my eye. The doctor eventually peeled my eyelid back, got the piece out, and I'm okay for the most part. I have to keep drops in my eye. Long story short, wear safety glasses. I have been far too laxed on this for far too long, and it took something like that to really change my mind, but you will see me wear these all the time now. Because what I think sometimes are a waste of time to find them and go put them on, it sure beats wasting an entire day of doing work because of a stupid little piece of wood in my eye. So wear your safety glasses, kids. As the ultimate I told you so for my wife, she posted this sign while I was at the doctor, which I think is kind of funny. Anyway, we're back, my eye works. I'm gonna put my safety glasses on and we're gonna get to putting the trusses together. All right, I've got all the truss pieces cut up, I've got all the fasteners staged, I've got everything set up to be kind of a mini assembly line, so this should be a fast part, assuming I did everything right. But we'll get these put together and then we'll put them in place. I'll admit, this is probably a waste of time, but I figured some construction adhesive on the top plate couldn't hurt. And I wanted to have as much headroom in the shed as possible, so I'm going with a raised tie roof truss design, which I had no idea that's what it was called until I looked it up. I literally just made it up. Now, I'd love to say I did all the calculations and figured this is going to be the strongest design, but no. I just drew it up. Which, now that I think of it, would be a real bummer if they broke when I stood on them. Anyway, too late now. I flipped over each truss and did the exact same on the opposite side. Except for the end gable trusses, those only have plates on one side. Now to wrestle these bad boys up here. It's not that they're heavy, they're just really awkward, especially when you're working from a dinky toy ladder like I am. I decided to try some temporary furring strips to hold each truss in place and get them spaced apart. This method actually turned out to be more work, and I did it a little bit different on the other side, which you'll see. Did I mention doing this by yourself sucks? Because it does. Now I wish I could say I was bird watching, but I'm staring at yet another mistake I made. Since my trusses are not symmetrical, I accidentally made two of the same ones, so this end truss has the plates on the wrong side. It's okay though, we can make it work, no going back now. To keep all the trusses aligned as I put them up, I attached a string between both end truss centers. Keeping everything straight will make sheathing go much smoother later. Now finally adding the blocking between the trusses. I had to remove the screws and the furring strips as I went, and it just kinda got to be a pain. I guess this is one of the costs of working alone. And of course doing the obligatory hanging test. See, things are plenty strong, right? Right? Finally adding hurricane straps to each truss connection to the top plate. Now I don't foresee too many hurricanes hitting Ohio anytime soon, but you can never be too careful. Now for the opposite side trusses, I figured why not just add the blocking first? That should make things easier and faster. That is if I can keep my balance and stay on top of the ladder. Did I mention doing this alone kind of sucks? So we've got most of the trusses up. We've got 3 on each end. I still got to do the middle trusses. And that's where it gets a little complicated, at least for me in my head, because the angle is going to change on one side. And actually the Fusion 360 measurements and angles were pretty much dead on, so I think I'm going to trust them to make at least the first truss, put it up there, try it. Assuming that works, we'll make a jig like we did before, and then we'll bang out the other 3. Sparing you of another montage of me making trusses, voila! The 4 inside trusses are now done. Okay, so it's the next morning. We're gonna get all these things put in place. By the way, this truss stuff is taking way longer than I would have thought. So if you're doing this yourself, just give extra time for doing roof stuff. It just, for whatever reason, takes forever. Also, I invested in a real ladder, so I won't be standing on a wobbly thing again, which should make it a lot easier. And of course, our string center line is still in place, so we're gonna use that to make sure everything is lined up so that when we go to sheathe this thing, it's nice and smooth. Now, if I were you, I'd be sitting there thinking, okay, how much is this guy really spending on this project? Well, let me tell you. The biggest chunk of spend here is obviously lumber. For a delivered package plus mini runs to the local box store, I spent in total $1,003. The next bucket is fasteners. This includes nails for the nail gun, concrete anchors, and screws. That total was $210. And finally, hardware and miscellaneous, which was almost entirely hurricane straps and truss plates. That was $135. That brings the grand total for the framing so far to $1,349. And the running project total to $4,472. And just like that, the major framing for the walls and the roof is now done. And I'll just say that the truss work took way longer than I originally thought. I mean, I've got several days just in making and hanging and spacing and blocking the trusses. Now, most of that is because I'm doing it by myself, but if you are gonna build something like this, especially by yourself, just take that into account. I went ahead and added hurricane straps to all of the trusses that we just added, including any ones that we may have missed before. So now both the roof and the framing are locked tightly together. Now, I did end up adding more blocking to the original trusses that we put up. You can see the blocking that I added towards the top. To be honest, I have no idea if this is even needed, but because I have a bunch of scrap 2x4s laying around, I figured I'd throw it in. The whole roof structure, now that it's all blocked together, is really rigid and really stiff. and it's gonna get even that much stronger once we put the sheathing on top. Now in the next episode, we're gonna finish all of the framing details that are left, like framing out the 2 windows over each end gable. We've got soffit ladders to make, we've got to make a whole front porch, and do things like subfascia. Plus, we're gonna start adding some siding, which is really gonna stiffen up the whole structure. I'm interested to know what you guys think about progress so far. If you're a carpenter, I'm sure you're gonna give me all kinds of lessons on things I did wrong, but please do, because I wanna hear them. One thing I wanna illustrate in this video series is just how approachable something like this can be. I'm certainly not a carpenter, I know nothing about construction, but a few YouTube videos and some reading got me to a point where I made this that's not falling on my head yet. And finally, thank you so much for watching. If you're not already subscribed and you want to keep continuing to follow along as I build this thing, make sure you do that and turn on notifications so that you know when the next build video comes out. There's still plenty left to do as I race to beat winter, because every morning when I come out here, it's a little bit colder. So I got to get this finished up. I will see you guys in the next video.